From brutal offshore drilling platforms all the way to the homeowner and hobbyist, Lincoln Electric's 125 years of experience provides the quality you need. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Lincoln Electric. Whether your project vehicle is brand new or 50 years old, Napa will have the parts and tools you need to get the job done. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Napa Auto Parts. No hesitation. Welcome back to another episode of the Newfoundland Hobbyist. I really appreciate having you here. If you haven't watched last week's episode, we got started on a very interesting project, and that was to build a set of fine woodworking or carving chisels from scratch, 100% made by us right here in this shop. And this is a project I've wanted to do for a few years now, just never taken the time to do it, but I'm finally doing it, and it's a challenge. It's the first time we've done it. If you haven't seen that yet, we're going to catch you up right now. We began by drawing out some designs and dimensions on some blank 01 tool steel stock. Now, with our patterns drawn just like we think will work out, we went ahead and cut out those designs on a metal bandsaw, getting closer to our final dimensions. Some grinding, drilling, and engraving brought us closer to our final result, which is a chisel that is pretty much ready for heat treat. Now that you're up to speed, it's time to get on to the next step, and that is heat treat. Heat treat is very exciting. It's action-packed. It's difficult to film for you guys because everything happens really quickly, and it's something you have to be very precise with, because if you don't get it right, the whole project is over. It's garbage. This is garbage. And there's quite a bit of science and stuff that goes on in the heat treat process. Now right here we have our chisels that we've been working on, and I've chosen 3/16 thick 01 tool steel. It's the same steel I use for all of my knives. I really love 01. It's a high carbon oil hardening steel. Now the difference, and not all steels are created the same, right here we have a piece of mild steel. This is just steel like you would get at a steel yard, or most steel that you would have around your property, or the angle iron your bed frames are made of, just general purpose welding steel. It's going to be made from mild steel like this. Now my knife steel, the steel we're using here, comes in blanks of different dimensions I ordered in for my projects. This steel is measured on a scale of what's called Rockwell hardness. This steel is measured on a scale what's called HRC, Rockwell hardness, group C or class C or scale C, and that is a specific range of hardness. Something like mild steel would not even make it up to the HRC category. So this is actually too soft. The carbon content is too low for this to be hardened for a project like this, or a knife or anything like that. This doesn't even make the HRC scale. Now when this steel arrives to me, like this raw billet right here, it's in a state called an annealed state, and that means it's in the softest state possible for this type or composition of steel structure, which is 01 tool steel, and that is somewhere right around high 20s to 30 on the HRC scale. And what that does is it allows me to process it. You can still drill this steel. It's still harder than what a mild steel would be, but you can drill it and you can cut it on the bandsaw and you can grind it just as we did to shape these chisels. Once you've done what you've wanted to do with the steel and you've got your holes drilled, you've got your engraving done and a lot of your bevel work done, then you can go ahead with your heat treat process. Once that's done, you're not going to be able to drill this anymore, except for like a diamond abrasive bit. You're not able to punch holes in this. So it's very important you do the right things first before heat treat, and then you move on to your heat treat. Now this is my heat treat process, which has adapted a lot over the years, but it's still quite simple. I have a forge here that runs off propane. So a forge is just a container to hold our heat. You can build them with a lot of different types of materials, but they have to withstand very high temperatures, up in excess of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So we have a propane tank down here that drives propane up to our forge nozzle, which is coned for a Venturi effect. So it'll draw air down through along with the propane. We regulate the air on top of propane mix, and that allows us to get enough temperature to heat our steel. Now this right here is an oil quench tank. I need that because I work with 01 tool steel, which is an oil hardening steels. Some steels harden in different ways. Some steels are just air hardened steels. You can take them out and they can cool in the air. What oil does for the process, or what the cooling does, is freeze the state of the steel structure right at the right time. When you heat the steel up in the forge, those steel molecules start moving around and their structure actually changes. On a cellular level, on a molecular level, the steel structure changes. Now, once those molecules are just where you want them, the structure of the steel is moved to the exact right spot from the heat. The dunk in the oil, and that oil has to be the proper temperature as well, but the dunk in that oil freezes that molecular state of the steel. So when you pull that out, then you have a piece of steel that is hardened to the right amount. You can overdo that, you can underdo that. If you don't heat it up enough, or your oil temperature is at the wrong stage, there's so many things that can go wrong in the heat treat process that just give you a piece of steel with a poor heat treatment that's not going to perform well. It's either not going to hold an edge, or your edge is going to be too brittle to use. It's just going to be chipping and crumbling. A lot of different things can happen in the heat treat process. I've been working with 01 so long in the same setup. I believe I've really honed my skills on being able to get the most out of the heat treat for this particular steel. I'll go ahead and cut my shop lights once we start the heat treat process, and the darkness in the room will allow me to better gauge the color temperature of our steel. Whether I'm in the workshop or out on the trails, Wild Med Kits provides me with the equipment I need to stay prepared. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by wildmedkits.ca. As a custom knife maker and craftsman, sharpening has become a part of my daily routine. I use paulsfinest.com for all of my sharpening equipment. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Paul's Finest.
Fairly good.
My first forge was one I built myself. A wood and coal forge that I rigged a blower to, as you can see the inlet hose right here in this video. This is from my very early days, the first knives that I made with this little forge that I bubblegum welded together, and it worked. It got the steel hot enough that I was able to quench it for hardening, and that is really ultimately what's required.
Oh yeah, that's it, man.
Leaving your spine out?
Pretty well, yeah.
Yeah, I thought you might.
Running a propane forge inside like this has some risks. The most obvious being burns, both on yourself or on your property. But the second and the most silent and less obvious risk would be carbon monoxide emissions. And that's something you want to be able to monitor if you're going to be running a forge inside. Aren't those colors beautiful? We're heating up some steel there now, some billets to use to warm up our oil. Something else you've got to be careful about in that heat treat process is if the oil temperature's not right, or you don't dunk it just right at the right pace and the right motions, you can cause warping in your steel. And with something like Chisels, we cannot have any warping in that steel because you won't be able to bend it back after. When I first began running a forge several years ago, I actually found it very intimidating. It's very loud, an immense heat, an open flame like this that seems very volatile. It seems violent, feels violent, and it's only time and experience that allows you to get comfortable with that. Ooh, it is warm working in front of that forge, I can tell you that. The steel needs to be handled properly at this stage as well. You don't want the steel to get too cool or to remain too hot. There's a temperature we're going for. Like I said, a lot of that at this point in the journey will come down to experience. And just look at that. These are still pretty hot to the touch, but look at those colors. That uneven, scaly forge finish, that is just the prettiest thing. Just like I wanted, we filled in. We don't have such a pronounced engraving there now, which looked a little bit tacky looking. This will fill it in and make it a little more subtle. We'll get these in now to bake at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time. You'll watch how these colors change. Unlike fresh cookies, huh? And now that bronzy tone that we've taken on is what indicates that we've reached the right tempering process. You may even have hints of blue, but hints of blue would indicate a little too much heat. Now we can check for straightness. We're going to have to surface mill the backs anyways to have a proper fit. They are looking good. Now that we have our heat treat process complete, let me show you just the difference in what happens to the structure of the steel. Now right here we have a scrap piece of blank steel, annealed steel in its state that it arrives to me. This is what our chisels were before heat treat. I have a freshly sharpened punch here. Let's just take a look. A nice big fresh divot. Let's just watch what happens with this piece of fresh steel. Sharp punch. Nice large deep divot in that material. Now let's move down here close to the blade, or close to where the edge will be on the chisel. Now look at the head of our punch. We have removed the tip, and all we have done with the chisel is scratch off that black surface there. There's no divot, just a scratch into shiny steel. So that is what a high quality heat treat can do on a piece of high carbon steel, which is very, very exciting. Now what we're going to do is take these to the water wheel, strip off a lot of that forge grime, the oil that's baked on there, and get a nice even, what I call forge finish. For the beginner and advanced sharpener, the Edge Pro sharpening system makes it easier for you to get razor sharp edges every time. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Edge Pro Inc. Simmons Tire supplies all the wheels, tires, and accessories you need for everything from ATVs and cars to heavy equipment and machinery. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Simmons Tire. This tool I'm using right now is a surface grinder attachment for my 2x72 belt grinder. And it was a splurge, and it is a luxury, no doubt. And for a process like this, it just speeds up and removes your labor so much. We're able to precision grind to within, say, 1/1000th of an inch the backs of these chisels, which removes a lot of time hand lapping with sandpaper or whetstones. We can get quite an accurate finish to just touch up on the stones later. We're at a very beautiful stage there now. Scratch this surface so it's textured. We'll accept epoxy for our handle. This is the final finish here. Then we have machined the back of all the chisels so we know they are nice, true, flat, free of warps, scratches. This one actually had a slight bit of warp. I did quite a few passes, just chipping away at each end until we eventually took in the middle. So it's nice that we have a nice flat surface there now. Just beautiful. Very excited to continue with these. And now the peening process, which is somewhat tedious, but also enjoyable because it's a process that would have been so popular in years past when fasteners were a lot harder to get, a lot more expensive, or in times when they just simply didn't exist. You see, not perfectly straight, but close. We'll see what we can do as we grind off the excess later. It'll be less noticeable. We'll fine tune as we progress as well. There we are, all roughly peened. We'll go ahead, surface grind these now, and see how deep our mushroom is. See if it's enough to hold this. Now our peening actually worked much better than I expected. We have pretty much no seams there. Little bit of slackness. I may tighten it up later, we'll see. But once our scales go up against there, there's not going to be any move anyway, so it's not going to matter. They look lovely. Look at that brass next to the forged finish. One of the prettiest combinations you can get. We're going to be using micarta for its toughness. Micarta for our scales. And it'll be butted up against the brass, just like that. I've chosen this lovely olive green, soft, elegant, still a little modern. Really, really happy about that. Well, we're making some serious progress here. We're already at the stage of epoxying all the handles. We have them drilled. We have that brass peened. Now I'm mixing a 2-part epoxy, a slow cure, very strong epoxy. And a slow cure epoxy has an element of flexibility to it. A quick cure epoxy or a quick curing glue like cyanoacrylate, for example, tends to be very brittle. And in a situation like this, where the tool is going to take some impacts, it's best not to have a brittle glue. It might cause you some problems. When you're epoxying in a situation like this, make sure you add a little extra epoxy in places where you have visible joints to allow lots of squeeze out. That way, if you don't have two perfectly flat surfaces, your epoxy will squeeze out, fill those gaps. You'll be left with something that's pleasing to the eye.
So that is all the time we have left for today's episode. We're at the stage where we are epoxying the handles, so the remaining work is to grind in those handles, to finish sand them, to put our edges on, which is quite a process in itself, and then I'd like to get on to creating a beautiful handcrafted leather tool roll. So we'll be coming across quite a few more hobbies, covering them in detail as we finish up this project in the next episode. So I really hope you'll come back for that. Thank you so much for your attention. It is greatly appreciated. You can also find us on social media if you'd like some extra content. We're on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube as well under the Newfoundland Hobbyist name. I would also like to give a big shout out to our sponsors. Without them, this show wouldn't be possible. So if any way you can support them, if you're in any need of their products or services, it would be great if you'd use them and show them your appreciation for their support. Well, we have lots of remaining work to do on this beautiful chisel set we're crafting, and we'll finish it all in the next episode. So as always, make sure you tune in next week to the Newfoundland Hobbyist.